Hi there. My name is Karen Oakham. Some of you may remember me from my time reporting and being a news editor for Frontiers News Magazine and more recently, the Los Angeles Blade. My friend Max Huskins and I are very concerned about the midterms. So what we're doing is creating a project aimed at the midterms where we could talk to various candidates and various politicos about what's going on and what we can do to ensure that the Democrats keep the House of Representatives, gain seats in the Senate. That would be terrific. But today we have Los Angeles County Democratic Party Chair Mark Gonzalez, who I've known for ages, it seems, just years and years, who is helping us out with this project. I mean, I have a regular job. I now work at Public Justice, which is a nonprofit legal advocacy organization, and Max has his own job. But we're taking time out because this is so important, and I'm so pleased that Mark can be our first guest and tell us about the state of affairs in California, how democracy is seriously at stake, including in this state and in this county. So, first of all, let me say welcome, Max, so you know who I'm talking about. Max, you want to say hello?
Hello, everyone. Producer Max from behind the scenes here. Karen, it's so good to be here with you today. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so thrilled to hear everything that you have to say to the citizens and the voters out there and provide your insight on what the political climate is currently looking like. All right, I'm going to pass it off back to Karen. Karen, take it away.
So, Mark, tell us first, please, about your perception of where we are in the state of democracy in this country, in the country, and then in the state of California.
No, I first of all, good morning, and thank you, Max, and thank you, Karen. As I mentioned to you before, whenever you email or text or call, I will always say yes to you, and I just want to thank you for the work and
Thank you.
that you have done. And I think you need to get a little bit more credit about how you paved the way for so many people and so many LGBTQI plus candidates in the last 3 decades or so that you've been doing this. So that's a compliment to say,
I'm old.
no, but it's to say that
Yay for older people.
you've paved the way for experience, and people can't forget the work that you've done. And talk about the state of democracy. It's about where we've been and where we're going and how we need to kind of continue the progress that we've made and not going backwards. And especially as we've seen in the Supreme Court, talk about the state of democracy. LGBTQ rights are certainly something that are on the table and something that you have fought for in the last 30 years plus, but have given that platform to those of us to be able to have that. But that is something that, in terms of democracy, it certainly is at stake. When we talk about the midterms, we kind of have to reflect back and remember how we got to this point. The census. Folks forget about the census and how it impacted us here, specifically in California, and how there was a huge undercount because of the Trump administration and the narrative that they created that if you were undocumented, you couldn't participate. And there was this fear mongering amongst that particular community that, especially here in California, we had 53 seats on the congressional side, and we lost one seat, in particular in the southeast portion of Los Angeles, where Lucia Roybal Allard's seat and the Lowenthal seat got combined into one seat. And so with that, there was a undercount of 100,000 people in that particular area. And so we lost one seat. So we went from 53 seats to 52 seats. I say that because of the 52 seats, 42 seats are Democrat, 10 of which are considered purple, 5 of which are considered to be flippable. So I think that as California goes, so goes the nation. I know that's cliche to say that, but the point is, I think that Speaker Pelosi is really relying, particularly here in California, to sustain a majority in the House so that she can obviously remain as Speaker, but that we can kind of continue that progress. And so I think that, Biden's approval ratings have gone up. We've seen a significant amount of, his impact on the flux of gas prices, obviously forgiving student loan debt. And there's many of these national issues that are gaining that attention that are going to force folks to come out to the polls come November 8th. What's also important to take away in the state of democracy is women. Women are constantly under attack. Women of color are constantly under attack. I can say that in terms of being a male, but the real meaning that we're not so affected by that, but we are affected by it. And men need to stand up for women in this regard because the majority of the country is women, and we have to educate those about other males about what we need to do to help that. That it's not our right to make any of those choices for women, but we have to stand up for women, and that is what's on the ballot here in California. Proposition 1 and protecting those women here in California and frankly in other states. Gavin Newsom is putting out ads in Indiana and in Texas and other states about protecting women, and that's what's going to drive women to the polls. And we saw that in some of these elections that have been happening these last few months. And I get the chill saying that because I come from a single parent family household where my mother raised me to be this way, and she being a strong Catholic Latina herself has always been pro-choice on that. And that is something that she has fought for and that you have fought for, Karen, and others. And so we've got to make sure that we protect that. So I think women are going to come out strong in this particular election. And as always, they did it during the 2020 election. And, women are going to turn the tide. And we have to make sure that we are there as men to self-identified man to help them with that. And I think that that's what's important, and that's what's on the ballot. Proposition 1 is a ballot measure sponsored by Planned Parenthood, basically protecting women's rights, kind of on the Planned Parenthood heels of right to an abortion here in California. Election day is not just November 8th in this case. Election day starts the first week of October. Why is that important? It's the 6th time that every single Californian registered voter in California will receive a ballot in the mail. That's important because ads are going to ramp up. Folks are going to start to get their ballot in the box, and they're going to look at it, and they have literally a month to return it. And it has to be postmarked by election day in order for it to count. Or you can drop it off at a post office, or you can drop it off at a voting box location. Why is that critical? Because it's already mid-September, and we're getting to a point where those ballots will be here in less than 2 weeks. We have to be able to educate voters on the down ticket ballot, including from the entire statewide down to your local ballot measures, as to what that means and how to vote down ticket. What's is particularly important here in what is the city of Los Angeles is that this is the first time you've had a lot of the city elected officials on the same ballot as the state ones, meaning that in order to save taxpayer dollars, there were certain measures in play to combine city races that would normally be in March into June and so forth to be all on the one ballot. So you have a different sector of voters who are turning out to vote down ticket. And so, it really does affect everything at, as they say, all politics is local. That's one example of that as to how, all of these races are going to be on one ballot. So, it's up to us to continue to educate those of us who are on this platform to really do the research as to what it means, and those of us who are those of individuals who are in office who we've endorsed, what that means and the importance of making sure that they get reelected.
We should pause here for a second and just note your website, lacdp.org, because I noticed that you have a digital voter's guide, essentially, on the page that has your endorsements. So could you speak a little bit to that? Because you're talking about how we need to, do the work ourselves in a lot of cases and do some research, but you kind of already have a handy guide.
Yeah, look, listen, at the end of the day, our membership is elected every 4 years on a partisan ballot. I trust the work that our membership does and that our delegations do across LA County. And we just had a meeting that wrapped up this past Tuesday. We adjourned at 1:30 in the morning, but that's because we go through every single race. There are 88 cities that make up LA County. And so for us, it's up to our delegations to review those. We had well over 250 candidates apply for our endorsement this November cycle. We still have a few that we're going to take up in October. But the significance of that is we really have folks who look through those local races, make those recommendations. It goes to the body to a full floor vote. Again, this body was elected by their local assembly districts and on the ballot to help to facilitate the endorsements of good Democrats in your backyard. And so our voter guide shows what the body passed just this past week. And it tells voters where the official Democratic Party's position is on those races. And so we took up a number of local ballot measures and tax measures that are affecting certain industries in your backyard. And so we have those, and that voter guide If it's not updated now, it will be updated. So continue to look at that as we take on more races as we head into October.
I do need to point out, because I think a lot of people are confused about this, but the LA County Sheriff is actually an elected position.
Correct.
However, the LA County Board of Supervisors cannot fire him or her, but him, Villanueva, in this case, if he steps over the line. And it's my understanding there's a proposition to give the board power to hold the sheriff accountable, as well as Villanueva being up for re-election. And he's very much in the news right now, having issued a search warrant at LA County Supervisor Sheila Kuehl's home. What is that all about? And what is this about how there are sheriff's deputy gangs? I mean, what's going on?
Yeah. Look, I think at the end of the day, we have to, and I have to, as the leader of the Democratic Party, admit when we made a mistake. I think what's crucial to that is when we endorse the current sheriff, this was historic for us to endorse somebody who was a Democrat over 100 and something years, and that we, made a pivotal change to put somebody in who was and is a Democrat and expressed those values of the Democratic Party, unlike the previous sheriff. Unfortunately, though, this particular sheriff, many of our membership, many Democrats across the county feel that they've been duped and they've been lied. And so he's now been appearing on Republican, Fox News. He's been on Republican platforms talking about his agenda. And he's come into the Board of Supervisors immediately criticizing them because they didn't support him in the beginning. And as we saw through COVID and a number of other hills and valleys through his administration, whether that be gangs or hiring people who were fired or dismissed and come back, he's exhibited behavior, that some would call Trumpinian, And so for us, there is a ballot measure that the Board of Supervisors put up that have in the news has been considered as retaliatory in regards to what Sheila Kuehl has kind of put forward. And so there's a measure A that the Democratic Party took up and supported, which gives authority and power to the Board of Supervisors to remove a sheriff in this case. And so, to your point about not being able to let this one go, this measure would allow this person to do that. And so what's important to take into is how did we get to this point? Why does the Board of Supervisors even have to create a measure like this? And this is the reason why. And so there are so many stories and so many reasons we can go into it. For full transparency, we have endorsed Luna for sheriff. I think we will be successful in that. But unfortunately, this is the route that the current sheriff has gone in. And it's just been a huge disappointment across the board. And so for us, it's important to get somebody in office who's not going to exhibit such bad behavior.
For regular viewers, please go and check out the LA County Democratic Party website, where you're going to find a lot of information. Thank you, Mark, very much for coming and appearing on the show.
Thank you, Karen. Next.
Good luck at the elections, and I hope everything goes well. Fingers crossed for you.
Thank you, sir. I look forward to seeing you guys again.
Coming up next is candidate Will Rollins, who will share with you about who he is. Max and I are here to pump you up, which you'll understand the reference in a minute. We're talking to Will Rollins, and thank you so much for doing this. Everybody I've talked to is just so excited about you and your candidacy. And, hopefully we can help introduce you to people and they can get just as excited about who you are and why you're doing what you're doing as we are. So I want to introduce you by way of your 30-second video where you talk about the January prosecuting some of the January 6th insurgents.
How do you think the government should use the law? As a prosecutor, I went after MS-13, the Sinaloa cartel, ISIS terrorists, and recently, the criminals who attacked the US Capitol. Ken Calvert called for dropping charges against the Capitol attackers, but he thinks it's okay to prosecute women who get an abortion and their doctors. Ken Calvert is using his power to undermine our democracy and take away women's rights. I'm Will Rollins, and I approve this message because we should use the law to protect our freedom.
So, Will, tell us a little bit more about why you decided to run.
Yeah, so, I was a federal prosecutor for 5 years in the Central District of California, specialized in counterterrorism and counterintelligence, and helped prosecute some of the people who attacked the Capitol, as I talk about in that ad. And as those of us in federal law enforcement were responding to that attack, my opponent, Ken Calvert, was voting to decertify the election, voting against the commission to even investigate the attack. And then even after it became clear that 5 police officers had died as a result of the attack, called for dropping charges against the Capitol rioters. And, I didn't want to look back on my life and regret not stepping up when our country needed people to challenge those who don't believe in the rule of law and our Constitution, regardless of political party. So that January 6th incident was, the impetus for me to get into it, but I had a lifelong interest in serving in national security that really goes back to September 11th. So junior in high school, when I walked into my first class of the day on 9/11 and saw the North Tower of the World Trade Center collapse. And like a lot of other teenagers about to turn 17, started thinking about enlisting after seeing those images of our fellow citizens covered in ash on the streets of New York and the Pentagon on fire. And in my case, I was held back from enlisting because I was scared of being outed. Don't Ask, Don't Tell was still in place. And, a lot of brave LGBTQ soldiers out there who enlisted anyway. I wasn't one of them. I just was too scared at the time of being outed. And so I knew I'd have to find a different way to get into national security. Eventually, went to Dartmouth, took Arabic, thought about joining the CIA, but really sucked at Arabic. So that was not going to be my path. Made it to Columbia Law School and then clerked for a couple of judges and was lucky enough to get hired at the U.S. Attorney's Office and got to specialize in national security. But as those rising threats from domestic extremism cropped up over the last 5 years, culminating in January 6th, it became clear to me that I didn't want to sit on the sidelines while an extremely radical group of politicians tries to derail what so many Americans have fought and died to give us today.
Yeah, thank you for that. And as a matter of fact, you really emphasize that and bring that up on another video that's on your website.
Yes, it's willrollins4congress.com.
We're going to show you that video now because a lot of it has to do with national security, and a lot of people, a lot of our people in particular, don't realize how central Los Angeles is and Palm Springs and Riverside. I mean, growing out, my father was in the military, was in the Air Force, and used to serve at Norton Air Force Base, Strategic Air Command going back in the day. But your second video that we're going to show now talks a lot about national security and how actually vulnerable we are.
I want to tell you a story. Last March, the U.S. Navy sent a ship called the Mercy here to the port of Los Angeles. The Mercy is a massive floating hospital, and it was here to help if our ICUs became overrun with COVID cases. One afternoon, not far from here, a train engineer allegedly pushed the throttle down on his train so he could derail it toward the Mercy. Fortunately, he came to a stop just short of the hospital ship. As a national security and terrorism prosecutor, I worked on that case. See, I wanted to work in counterterrorism because of 9/11. But today, some of our biggest threats are right here at home. And it's not happening by chance. The train engineer told investigators that he thought the Mercy was part of a government conspiracy and that he had to stop it. Sadly, his beliefs are not unique. We've all watched as people have become angrier and more violent as they've heard similar conspiracy theories and QAnon lies ripple across social media and then echo on Fox News. I saw the same thing when I helped prosecute people who attacked the US Capitol on January 6th. This is a systemic problem. Extremists, big tech, and media outlets profiting by spreading division based on lies, even as they erode our democracy and make it easier for adversaries like China and Russia to exploit us. But we can stop it. We can update our regulations to break down propaganda networks. We can require big tech, cable news, and talk radio to provide transparency in their advertising. And we can create a modern fairness doctrine so we can actually learn about both sides of an issue. That is the only way Americans can start to agree on basic facts again. And there is a lot of work that we need to do together, like reforming our criminal justice system, improving access to healthcare, and growing our economy while also protecting the planet. So let's kick out extreme politicians like Ken Calvert, who spread the big lies, and elect a new generation of leaders willing to save our democracy. At the end of the day, I think most Americans are like me and my partner, Paolo. We want to spend Thanksgiving arguing about who gets the last of the stuffing, not whether the earth is flat. Because as I tell my uncles every year, the earth is round and that stuffing is mine.
So we'll talk about that element and, additionally talk about how, if you can, go from that to segueing to, you were just talking about the fear of being outed. There is this mythological perception of gay men as weak. But here you are talking all about national security. So counter that argument. I mean, it ain't true.
It sure isn't. And, I think a lot of us who grew up in the 80s and 90s in the United States still experienced a lot of stigma, and there wasn't a ton of visibility in the national security space for LGBT people. And there wasn't a ton of visibility for people in the military who are LGBT, who have done extraordinarily heroic things fighting for our country overseas, who have died saving their fellow soldiers in combat. I mean, there are some incredible stories about the heroism of the LGBTQ community that I wasn't aware of as a kid. And the stigma that you just described is something that's very real that I experienced that kept me from thinking that I could serve in a lot of ways. And so, and being worried that my own government thought that there was something defective about me and my capacity to serve. And one of the stories I always think about after 9/11 is how many Arabic linguists in the US military were discharged when we had a critical need for translating ability to help protect our country. And talking to Republicans and Democrats alike about this issue, and you realize how stupid and counterproductive discrimination is as a national security policy. And I think one of the great things that sets America apart from countries like Russia and China is that we don't just say patriotism is about admitting that the country's always perfect. It's fighting to make it more perfect. And it's also fighting to make sure that we have equality in our military so that we have Arabic linguists, regardless of their sexual orientation, that we have people who can fly F-35s, regardless of whether they're gay, straight, or transgender. We have people who are good sniper, good shots, who can serve in the military, who can be great snipers if we need them, regardless of who they love and what they look like. That gives us a competitive and strategic advantage over some of these other threats from countries we face overseas who are repressive and want to hold down people from achieving their full human potential. And I think that that's an argument that we as Democrats and as candidates and as LGBT folks really need to remind people of, because when we do better, the country does better. And when we are all treated equally, the country itself rises to its full potential too.
I teased a little SNL meme about Arnold Schwarzenegger at the top, pump me up. We're going to hear it, pump you up. You worked for Arnold Schwarzenegger. Tell us a little bit about that, because it suggests that you know a little something about working in a bipartisan way.
Yeah, I mean, and my family is still to this day split between Republicans and Democrats. We've got folks in my family who voted for Donald Trump. We have people who voted for Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton, and we still love each other. We still have Thanksgiving together. We still have Christmas together. And so, that experience, I think, it really resonates with a lot of Americans right now who we love our family and friends, even when we disagree, and we are all craving reasonable, sensible leadership that can unite the country to deal with the threats that we as Americans face today, because adversaries would love nothing more than to divide us. And so what I loved about Governor Schwarzenegger, even though I didn't agree with him all the time on every issue, is he hired a bipartisan staff. And so he gave an opportunity to somebody like me, who was a Democrat coming out of college, to join his administration. He hired a Democrat to work as his chief of staff, Maria Shriver, another incredible first lady for the state of California, who they had a split family at home, right? So you think about that as being a reality for so many Californians. And I think having leaders who want smart people who disagree with them to engage and be parts of their administration, that's how we get better policy and compromise in the United States. And I really believe that so many Americans are craving that kind of sensible, substantive, constructive debate, as opposed to toxic extremism that's ripping the country apart and just making adversaries like Russia and China far too excited to exploit those divisions and keep us mad at each other.
Well, we are out of time for this segment, but I hope you'll come back as we get closer to the midterms, and let's catch up with you and see how your race is going. I mean, you're representing Palm Springs. I live in West Hollywood. This matters to us in Southern California. This matters to Congress. So I hope you'll come back, and thank you so much for coming on just, to say hello to us.
Thank you again for having me. It was great being with you all today.
Will, thank you so much for joining us here today. It's been a pleasure. Really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and insights on all those matters that I feel like are relevant to every single American today. Before we wrap up, I'm going to pass it off back to Karen for her closing thoughts on today's episode.
Well, I want to thank Mark Gonzalez and Will Rollins, two exceptional people who are working on our behalf to save democracy. And I want to thank Max as well. I hope you will come back and see our next show in about a week or so, and read us on the LA Blade, LosAngelesBlade.com, where I'll have a recap of what both Mark and Will had to say. But most importantly, please get engaged. Please do whatever you can, whatever platform you have, phone banking, door knocking, phone calling your friends, whatever you can do. Our democracy is at stake, and we really need everybody to get engaged and do whatever they can so that we don't wind up with an authoritarian government. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.